17.
Leopold. My dear friend, so good to see you. And how are you enjoying Frederick's genius?
Sergio slapped the counselor on the back, making him cough. But Leopold smiled and wiped his mouth.
Ah, the sculptor supreme. Thought you'd be around, Sergio.
Indeed, indeed. Wouldn't miss this bash for the world.
Is it too soon to inquire about your next masterpiece?
He held up a hand, palmed towards Sergio.
Apologies if that's a tad forward.
Not at all. In fact, things are progressing extremely well. Early stages yet, so I can't say too much even to you, my friend. But I'm expecting great things. And for that, I have this gentleman to thank. Leopold, I'd like you to meet my assistant and model, Mr. Terrell.
The counselor turned, and his eyes glinted with sharp intelligence as he looked Rodin up and down before meeting his own eyes. His lips parted and he gave a nod.
Mr. Terrell. Pleased to meet you.
The pleasure is most definitely mine, Counselor Leopold. Rodin grasped the man's outstretched hand, slightly warm, but that could be down to the temperature of the room. Leopold's grasp was firm, but he didn't push for a dominant position, and after holding for a few seconds his fingers released.
And my assistant can attest that your fame is spreading, Leopold. He told me something most interesting, barely a few moments ago.
Sergio's grin was wide and his cheeks glowed. He looked from Rodin to Leopold like a child expecting praise. Leopold raised his eyebrows and tilted his head.
Yes. I don't know about fame, but please tell me.
Rodin swallowed. He had to get this right, align himself to the counselor's own thoughts. Well, it's a somewhat delicate matter, he started, tilting his head closer to the man. You see, I've had a checkered past, and through a sequence of events that I have no wish to bore you with, I recently moved here from Kern.
Kern? All the way down there?
Leopold brought a hand up, placed it on Rodin's arm.
Tell me, is it true that the dome opens out onto the sea?
The files in the halfway house had provided many details on Kern Dome. It's more a case of the dome stretching over the water. I believe there's a mesh all the way to the seabed, but yes, it is possible to swim in the sea without leaving the dome.
Swim in the sea? Please tell me that you've partaken. Tell me how it felt to be in the waves.
The excitement was genuine, Rodin was sure of that. Oh, there's nothing like it. The salty taste in the air, the soft pull of the water beneath the surface, the exhilaration of the waves breaking over one's head. I've heard that there is a pool in this dome that mimics the sea, but, and I mean no offense, I feel sure it would be but a pale shadow of the real thing. Leopold sighed deeply.
I've used the pool often, but it's a dream of mine to swim in the real sea one day. I do so love the water. Don't you, Mr. Terrell?
The dream shot through Rodin's mind of falling and hitting water. Very much so. And he recalled something else he'd read about the counselor. And I must visit your great lake too. I usually stick to swimming, but maybe I should take the opportunity to try some of the other activities available there.
Oh, you must.
But you haven't told the counselor of his far-flung fame yet.
Sergio said.
I know he would love to hear how far his words have traveled.
Rodin grimaced, hoped Sergio didn't notice. The artist meant no harm, of course, but things were going so well. Of course, he said. It is just that our talk of the water distracted me. He shrugged, and maybe he saw a dash of frustration in Leopold's expression. What Sergio refers to is the fact that I read your speech while I was still in Kern. It's pleasing to know that your words have reached other domes, surely. Leopold nodded politely.
Indeed it is. But tell me, which speech was it?
The one you gave to the General Council a few months ago, concerning freedom of movement. Leopold tilted his head in interest, and Rodin pushed further. I must say, I was much taken by your arguments. Leopold glanced to the side quickly and leaned in close once more. Maybe too close, the man's breath was warm on Rodin's skin.
I am pleased, but I must tell you that not everyone shares your enthusiasm. That speech was not well received.
Of course it wasn't. Rodin knew that. Some of the other councillors had dismissed it as pointless fantasy, indulging a rising star but paying no heed to the man's words. Others had taken offense, demanding to know how Leopold could so disparage the dome by suggesting that residents would actually seek to go elsewhere. And a few recoiled in horror, arguing that freedom of movement between domes was just one step away from opening up the domes to the outside. "I understand," Rodin said, lowering his voice. "But how else would residents in other domes swim in the sea, if they could not travel to Kern?" And Rodin saw a way back. "And if I had not traveled from Kern, I wouldn't have the opportunity to use your lake." Leopold nodded and raised his glass.
An excellent point.
He opened his mouth, then closed it, a thoughtful expression crossing his face.
Tell me, have you ever tried sailing?
Rodin's heart beat faster. "No, I can't say I have. In Kern we had motor vessels, but nothing like sailing."
Oh, you must try sometime.
There was an opportunity here, but Rodin needed to be subtle. "I'm not sure. Isn't it dangerous?" Leopold huffed.
Not in the slightest. You should see some of the dinghies they have now, practically sail themselves, and always keep an even keel. Personally, I find such automation restrictive, and enjoy a purer form of the craft. And yes, I suppose there is the risk of a capsize, if one is not careful.
He raised his glass, one finger pointing to Rodin.
But I would surmise that you are not one to flinch from danger. You strike me as a person who welcomes challenges.
Rodin shrugged, tried to look meek. He didn't know if he pulled it off, though. Not that it mattered. Leopold nodded and continued talking.
An idea crosses my mind. I occasionally sail at night, when the weather permits.
Rodin showed surprise, even though this fact was one he had already learnt from his research.
The darkness adds a delightful contradiction, too, a peaceful atmosphere alongside a frisson of tension. It's an ideal time to not only push oneself in one's pursuits, but also to enjoy the company and conversation of an interesting individual. And so the notion comes to me that you might care to join me on my next jaunt across the moonlit lake.
The counselor looked at Rodin with expectant eyes, and Rodin took a breath. Again, he didn't want to appear too eager. But he allowed a slow nod, and Leopold's smile returned. "That is a most generous offer, counselor. I'd be honored to accept your offer."
Most excellent.
He turned to Sergio.
My friend, would you be able to forward your wonderful assistant's contact details?
Of course, of course.
Sergio beamed, clearly thrilled how his introduction had turned out.
Just so long as you don't keep him out all night. I'll need my breakfast in the morning.
Assuredly.
Then Leopold's gaze shifted over Rodin's shoulder, and a voice called the counselor's name. He sighed.
But if you will excuse me, gentlemen. Much as I would love to continue our conversation, there are others I'm duty-bound to meet. One of the hardships of being a public figure, I'm afraid. I'll be in touch, Mr. Terrell.
With a low nod to both Rodin and Sergio, Leopold left, walking across the grass. Rodin kept his smile inside and breathed slowly. His first meeting with the target, and the man had invited Rodin to a nighttime rendezvous, just the two of them in a secluded setting. And taking part in an activity that Rodin was sure contained some danger. The perfect time and place for an accident.